we are releasing a new hobo bag. This is the Rachel Tote. And this is also a new leather called Cove. You can see that the front of the bag has a different design. This is kind of a circular shape on the front. And then the back has this middle seam and a U shape to the design on the back. This is a low profile bag, so it'll sit on your shoulder really nicely without falling off. And if you can see the strap design, it has a little bit more thickness at the bottom, so this will fit over your shoulder really nicely and it won't fall off from being too thick. It also has really beautiful brass hardware and a magnet closure, so everything stays safe inside. And this bag is a little bit smaller than some of our larger totes. It's about 11 inches long and 12 inches high and about 2 3/4 width here. And there's also about a 13-inch drop from the top of the handle to the base. And the Cove leather is pretty oily. It has a matte finish and it also scratches up pretty easily. So you'll notice that there's a lot of variation on this leather. For instance, on this bag, there's this really interesting scarring and modeling all along the different panels of leather. And this leather is currently only available in this bag style, but we may be offering it in TNs and notebook covers coming up soon. And now looking at the inside of the bag, there aren't any inside pockets, but you do have a lot of space to store whatever you want to bring with you. For instance, we've got an A5 size traveler's notebook in here. Don't forget the cell phone. We have one of our Chic Sparrow zipper wallets and a simple pouch as well. And all of these things fit inside of the bag, so you can really fit a lot inside of this tote. That's the Rachel bag. This week we're releasing the Rachel bag in Cove leather, so we wanted to give you a little introduction to what makes this leather unique. So this is a matte leather with a really oily finish. It will easily scratch, so that's the first thing you'll notice about this leather, is that it'll show markings and lots of different variation and textures on this leather, but you can easily rub out any sort of marks that get on the leather. So it kind of has a rustic vintage feel right off the bat. It's also a pretty lightweight leather. It has a soft hand and it's very flexible. And there's also some pull-ups, so when you stretch and bend the leather, you'll see some changes in the color. And when you bend it, it does leave a little bit of marking, but it kind of gives it a really rustic, vintage sort of look. And it's pretty comparable to some of the more recent leathers that we've released recently. Here it is alongside Vesper and Spencer and Callahan. All of these are pretty soft, pretty flexible leathers that have a matte finish and lots of variation in the leather. So you'll see a lot of striations, a lot of scarring, and that's totally normal and natural. Comparing this to the Express collection that we released recently, the Express has a more shiny finish to it, and it also has a crackly sort of texture on the leather. So they're similar in thickness, but otherwise it's a pretty different leather from those two styles. And next we can compare it to the Artist leathers. These are a pretty similar thickness to Cove, but these leathers have more of a consistent coloring throughout and not as much scarring. So a little bit different from the Cove leather. Next, these are our Waypoint samples. So we do a lot of totes and handbags in this leather. So if you've gotten some of our bags in the past, you might be familiar with these. They're similar in that they're oily leathers, and they do have a tendency to scratch up pretty easily. But over time they get a really nice patina, and you'll see that the bag ages really nicely. And next we can compare them to our Creme Leathers. The Creme Leathers are a lot thicker than Cove, a heavier hand, it's a thicker leather, and it's also more consistent. So these two samples are going to have a more smooth finish and a more consistent coloring than Cove. There's a lot of variation in Cove, and so you can expect that your handbag will have slightly different textures between each piece of leather that makes up the bag. And the last one we'll compare is Darcy. So Darcy's part of the Austin collection. It's a pretty firm leather, a medium hand, but it's very firm and not very flexible. However, both of these leathers do scratch up and patina pretty easily. So if you're used to this kind of leather where you're comfortable with getting marks and little nicks on your leather, then you'll be comfortable with Cove because they'll both have that feature in the leather. Hopefully that gave you an introduction to our new leather, Cove.